Welcome back to the Forest River, North Dakota Mega Farm. In today's episode, it's finally time to close the book on what has easily been our biggest and busiest harvest season yet here in year 4. This year, we planted over 1,000 acres of crops, and after months of hard work, every acre has now been harvested and safely stored away in our massive silo system at the Mega Farm. That includes 250 acres of wheat, 300 acres of soybeans, and over 450 acres of corn. It's been a long, demanding season, but now comes the most exciting part of farming, selling it all off for what should be the biggest payday in the history of this farm. But grain wasn't the only thing we brought in this year. If you remember back during our wheat harvest, we didn't let all that straw go to waste. Instead, we dropped it all behind the combines and later baled it up using our massive Hesston baler. By the end of the operation, we had over 300 giant Hesston bales, each one holding 13,000 liters of straw. We hauled them straight to the animal dealer, which was conveniently right beside the field, making for some quick turnarounds. I finished up the last few loads off camera, and in total, just from straw alone, we brought in nearly $300,000. That was a huge bonus on top of everything else we've got waiting in storage. Fast forward a bit, and now we find ourselves in December of year 4. Grain prices have finally spiked. Corn and wheat are both at some of their best numbers yet, and with millions of liters sitting in our silos, this is the perfect moment to sell. I'll be starting things off by firing up our 3 semi-trucks and sending them on auto-drive routes to begin hauling corn to the grain elevator. Once the system is flowing smoothly, I'll be heading down to the dealership to add yet another truck and trailer to our fleet. With a 4th semi on the road, we'll be able to move grain much faster and get through this selling spree as efficiently as possible. While all of that is happening, I'll also be heading back to the farm to start taking care of some much-needed cleanup. Our entire harvest fleet, the combines, grain carts, and support tractors, are still sitting in the yard, dirty and worn down after weeks of nonstop work. Before winter really sets in, we'll be giving everything a good wash, a bit of maintenance, and then tucking it all away until it's needed again. And while this payday is exciting, what makes it even more important is what's coming next. This big sell-off is going to be the foundation for some major changes in year 5. I've been thinking about the future of this farm, and I've decided it's time to take things in a new direction. As successful as we've been with cash crops, I want to expand into livestock in a big way. The only problem is that our current mega farm just isn't designed for it. So here's the big news. I've made the tough decision that in the spring of year 5, we'll be selling off this entire farmyard and building a brand new operation somewhere else on the map. One that's fully equipped to handle cattle and livestock operations while still keeping the scale of a true mega farm. That means the money we make today isn't just profit, it's the start of funding a whole new chapter for Forest River. This is going to be our biggest payday yet, and it's the stepping stone towards some of the biggest changes this farm has ever seen. So let's fire up the trucks, start hauling grain, and find out just how much money we can bring in as we close out year 4 in a massive way here on the Forest River Mega Farm. If you're enjoying the Forest River, North Dakota Mega Farm series, please like, comment, and subscribe. for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.